Looking for more archaeological skills? The Society for American Archaeology offers continuing education to help you learn and advance professionally. Most events are certified by the Register for Professional Archaeologists, which means attendees receive continuing professional education credits. Some upcoming topics include faunal analysis, ground-penetrating radar, indigenous perspectives, and ethical training. Visit saa.org/online seminars for more information.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You are now entering the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, a show that uncovers what's fact, what's fake, and what's fun in the crazy world of pseudoarchaeology. Hello and welcome to the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, episode 152. I am Dr. Andrew Kinkella, your host for the eve, and tonight, the Menendez murders, and my teeny tiny bit of actual first-person information that I have locked deep inside my brain. No, this is not an admission of guilt. Okay, so we're going to talk about true crime tonight, which is a bit of a left turn, of course, from what we usually do, but not exactly. You know, I was thinking a bit about true crime, you know, and archaeology and pseudoarchaeology. And I think they're all like very close bedfellows. You know what I mean? It seems to me like most archaeologists or archaeology type of people are also really into true crime. Like, raise your hand if you're into true crime. You know what I'm saying? In my time in this archaeology world, I've found that just a lot of people are, you know? And you can see why. Because it takes the same kind of mental focus, you know? And so somebody who finds that kind of mental focus satisfying in archaeology, you know, the idea of having only so many artifacts and only so many facts of the past and trying to piece together a puzzle. It's the same thing in true crime, right? You only have so many facts and you have to piece together the whodunit. And my big joke with true crime is like, they have so much evidence compared to us. You know what I mean? It's like, hey man, your murder only happened like 10 years ago. My murder happened 2,000 years ago, you know? And you do get sort of a pseudo-archaeological push in there too, because while we in archaeology have people who are trying to just sell fake stories, you have people trying to sell fake stories in true crime, right? You know, various lawyers, various liars, and so on. So it's just so funny. It feels like a very similar world. Now, before I get into my fun little tale that has to do with the Menendez murders, I do want to say that just recently we did this like real archaeology event. And by we, I really mean Flint Dibble and a couple other people who helped him out. My friend Frederick Trushman was one of those people, and there were many others. But they did an event over, I believe it was October 25th through the 27th. And it was where creators who make real content, like me, what we would do is we would upload content and put the hashtag of real archaeology to it. And it was this push, you know, against the pseudoarchaeology crowd, where it's like kind of the hear us roar thing. And I thought it was super successful. The hashtag real archaeology was trending. I was really proud of Flint and my other friends, really kind of all of us who do this kind of week in, week out, year in, year out. I thought it was a really excellent idea. So just massive kudos to Flint and crew. It just really kicked ass. If you guys go online, you'll see these like hashtag real archaeology stuff. And some of my stuff has a hashtag real archaeology on it, you know, and just do a deep dive and look, you know, if you follow my stuff, like look at these other people, what they're doing. We're all trying to make, you know, reality fact-based content. And I thought it was a smashing success. So that was my kind of last weekend. You may also be wondering, and I know you are, you're like, Kinkella, you are late on your recording, like later than usual. Like this show, I'm recording this show 6 days after it was supposed to air. that is, with a round of applause, a new low for me. And, I think it's just because you guys do a lot of stuff, and I know we all do a lot of stuff, but I had to focus a little on some of the real archaeology stuff. So I kind of put this to the side, but I'm really happy I did ultimately, because I was going to do a show on something completely different, which I'll do in the future. But the Menendez murders thing is just sort of flooding the news recently, because I guess the Menendez brothers are in the news again because they're thinking of either retrying the case or basically reopening it. And there's this big push to free the Menendez brothers, basically. Speaking of hashtags, I'm sure there's a million of them. They're free the Menendez brothers. So what? And this reminded me of a personal experience I had way back in, I think it was either late 93 or maybe 1994. It was in that time period. And I was a college student, right? So yes, friends, let me take you back in the Wayback Machine to a place we go quite often. The early 1990s. Times were better then. A Shangri-La that we can never quite go back to. But check it out. So the backstory with the Menendez killings goes like this. Basically, two brothers in a very wealthy family in Beverly Hills cold-bloodedly murdered their parents in their living room with shotguns. There you go. Right. And this was before the OJ case, right? And this actually happened in 1989. So for me personally, I was still in high school. I wasn't in Southern California yet, but it made the news. Of course, it was huge. And for the first several months, so the Menendez brothers do this. The police don't really quite realize it's them for 6 months or so. And they go on this shopping spree. They buy a Porsche. They buy Rolexes. Right? It's just this crazy made for Hollywood insanity. And then the police finally catch on. Oh, it was the two brothers who cold-bloodedly murdered their parents. And then after that, you have the trial, which happens in basically 93, I think, into 1994. And of course, the case kind of ratcheted up in levels. Again, first, you have the crime, right? In I believe it's late 1989. And then the sort of whodunit. I remember, I think the brothers were saying that they thought the mafia killed them because their father was really wealthy, right? He's a multimillionaire and kind of part of big business with a double capital B. And so they're kind of trying to sell this story. And of course, it just smells really funny sort of throughout, right? So the public is at first confused. Who was it? I mean, it kind of seems like it might be the brothers because, in these kind of crimes so often it's family members. But it was just very confusing. It was very tabloid foddery. I don't know if there were, if you look back historically, there were other tabloid fodder cases, be it the Lindbergh baby, or this kind of thing. But this really was kind of the case for the 90s, until OJ. So OJ overshadows this. But, so people were unsure who did it. Then the police kind of finally figured out. The brothers, basically, ultimately tell various people and are exposed, right? And then are finally brought in and taken to jail. And then they're in jail, obviously, 3 years before the trial starts. So the trial starts. It's kind of that trial of the century kind of vibe. And of course, ultimately, they are convicted of murder and basically given life sentences without parole. And they've been in jail basically ever since it was probably early 1990 or something like that. So 34 years. When they committed the crime, the two brothers are Lyle and Eric. Eric was pretty young. I think he was 19 or so. I might be getting these a year off or so. And Lyle, the older brother, was 21, 22, something like that. So picture them at that at that age. I'm thinking that most of you, sort of listening to my voice, you know the Menendez case, right? It's doubly so now because there's this TikTok movement to free them, right? So just like me, you've been inundated with your various social media, with your various news reports on just like, oh, should the Menendez brothers go free? Now, I don't have really a horse in this race either way, honestly, in terms of should they go free or not. I actually don't know how I feel. But what I do know is I did have some interactions with basically one of the witnesses, and I didn't know that he was. And the things he told me, I thought were really interesting. And ultimately, the way the media made him out, I thought was fascinating for how cruel it was in some ways and how different it was from my personal experience with this person. And when we come back, we will figure out who this person is. Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, and we are talking about the Menendez murders. And I have done this setup just to keep you around, just for clickbait. It's really sad. I'm just really see-through and pathetic, let's be honest, of the sort of who in the case did I know a little bit personally. All right, let me set you up with how this went down for me. It's either late 1993 or early 1994, and I'm at UCSB, right? And I was a double major at UC Santa Barbara in archaeology, of course. I know, you're like, thank God. And film. I was a double major, and so I had to take the full suite of film classes. You know, I took a ton of them. And I did, as an aside, I really enjoyed it. I was originally going to be a drama major, and there were aspects of drama that just the major aspects that I wasn't really into. And so I sort of dropped that, but I was missing that creative outlet, and film really filled it. I really enjoyed my time. It left a scar in the best possible sense. The film studies department at UCSB, it was great. So by 93, 94, I'm like a juniorish, seniorish. I graduated ultimately in 95. But to graduate, all film majors had to take this really high-end film seminar. And in fact, I think there were two of them that you had to take. And we were in this class, and this is like an upper division, you know, really only take it when you're a senior. Maybe you're a junior and you take it, but really these are like kind of the upperclassmen, right? And it's taught in the little room. You know, I think many departments on campus will have like the little room, the little like meeting room. And in the little room, there's going to be a big table and then a bunch of seats around it. And the room might hold like 18 people if you shove them in there. You guys know what I mean. These are the kind of, it's like a conference room, you know, they're physically quite small with a big table. And then you have chairs around the table. And then in this case, you also had a handful of other chairs that were right against the wall. It was one of those ones where there was barely any room to walk, right? Almost like a boardroom in a way. So I'm in there and the professor's up front. And this professor was a very loud, like boisterous, in a very positive sense, dynamic lecturer. And he's talking about film theory. And I always like sitting in the back. I've been that guy, right? The sit in the back guy. And as class went on, I would always sit next to this other guy. And the two of us, just as classmates, would just have a conversation, you know, about our day. You know, we would just talk about what 22-year-olds talk about, you know, oh, hey, I'm doing this thing with my girlfriend next week. Hey, oh, did you go to that party? Oh, yeah, sure. You know, oh, man, like, how's your car doing? I heard you needed to like get new tires, whatever. And we would just shoot the shit. And I really liked him. I found this guy to be like self-effacing, smart, personable, very smiley, if that makes sense, you know, just like a positive guy. And we would just talk. We'd talk about the assignments. And I was just really happy that I sat next to him. You know, we just had a friendship in class. And so the time goes on in class. UCSB is on the quarter system. So instead of a 15-week semester, it's only a 10-week quarter. I can't remember when this starts to happen, but fairly early on, he starts to miss class. And then there's a part where he really misses a lot of class. And I'm kind of, I'm going to class, like whatever it is, twice a week. And I'm like, where is he? Like what's he doing? Like, this is a serious seminar class. Like you got to be there. You got to watch the movies. You got to like talk the high end stuff. You got to do papers. There's a ton of papers. It's a very rigorous class. Some of this high end film theory stuff, it sounds like it would be easy. Oh, you just watch movies, but it's not. It is it takes a lot of effort and time and focus. So a couple of weeks go by and I'm like, did he drop? But one day he comes back and I remember I see him come in. And he's on time, but he walks in up front and he talks to the professor for a minute and they kind of nod and they kind of are like, okay, he kind of gets this okay. And I'm looking at him like, what the hell? Right. So he sits down and I'm like, dude, like you've missed a lot of classes. You're going to fail this. This is serious, right? I'm like, dude, I can show you my notes and stuff, of course, but you got to be here for this material. This is heavy stuff. And he's like, man, I know, but the trial. And I'm like, the trial? Did you get a DUI? Because, of course you're a college student. You're like, why would somebody be like, gone for a trial, and he's like, and he was kind of a little weighted, when he said this, and he's like, I'll never forget this. He's like, have you heard of the Menendez trial? And if you're living in Southern California in like the early 90s, everyone has heard of the Menendez trial. It's on TV every night. It's on court TV. This is a brand new thing at the time, right? It's the thing that everyone is watching and riveted to, right? And I'm like, have I heard of the Menendez? What are you court? What? I'm like, yes, I've heard of the Menendez trial. He's like, well, the younger brother, Eric, I was his best friend. I'm the guy who turned him in. And I'm like, oh my God. And we're having this conversation in class while the professor's up front in this little room, right? And he's talking his high-end film theory stuff. So I'm like trying to have this conversation with this student and I'm pissing myself, like wanting to talk to this guy so bad. But like the professor's talking, he's kind of looking at us and I'm trying to look at him like, no, I wasn't talking. But as soon as as the professor starts on another rant about film, I would lean over and ask more questions because I was dying, right? So I leaned over to him and I'm like, hey man, you gotta tell me. Remember, this is early days. We didn't know as much as we know now about the Menendez trial. I'm like, you gotta tell me, did they do it? And I remember he leaned back over and he's like, Andrew, they totally did it. It was premeditated. They planned to do it. They are cold-blooded killers. They did it for the money. And I was like, wow. Because I'm getting like primo info in like my upper division film theory class, right? And so it's just like the movies, right? He tells me this thing and I'm freaking out. And then the professor's looking at us like, you boys need to shut up. The professor never said that, but I could tell. I'm like, oh, right. Because I'm trying to be cool. I'm trying to I didn't want to be disrespectful, but I gotta know this stuff. So as the class progressed, I leaned over and I asked him more stuff, and honestly, I can't remember everything I asked him, but I remember a handful of things. One of the other things I was like, hey, did you do any interviews? Like, do people ask you to do interviews about this? And he's like, man, they ask me all the time, right? The media ask me all the time about interviews. And he's like, you know what? I stay quiet because I think he had a lawyer who was telling him, not to or whatever. But then he's like, but man, then a current affair came. And if any of you guys remember from the 90s, a current affair was like a big sort of media show, sort of full media hype kind of show. And I can't remember how much money he said, but I remember it was a ton. I want to say it was either $20,000 or $50,000. He was like, then A Current Affair offered me like $50,000 for an exclusive. And yeah, I took the money and I talked to them. And I was like, wow. And I was like, yeah, dude, of course I would too. You got to remember, we're like 22-year-olds. I think he was like a year or two older than me, but we're in the same generation. You can't even tell. But I was like, yeah, dude, I would have done that in a second. So he's like, yeah. And then he did the interview, and and that was that. And I'm like, and then some time passed, and then I asked him another thing because I remember that he seemed like tense about certain bits of it, as you would think anyone would. You have to go and testify in a murder trial. And I was like, hey man, you seem kind of scared, or something's like, it seems like it's kind of like weighing on you a little bit. I'm like, what's up? And he's like, look, both of those brothers are, millionaires. And we have to remember that the time between when the brothers committed the murder to when they were put into jail was like 6 months. So they had plenty of time to hide money and this kind of stuff. And he's like, I just have a real feeling that they have a lot of money on like offshore accounts. And if they get any kind of parole, I remember he was really worried about them like getting parole. He's like, if they get any kind of parole, they're just going to leave this country. And Andrew, they are vindictive, and they might like send someone to kind of do something to me. And I'm just really worried about that. And I'm just telling you guys, he just seemed to really feel like that. At the time, that answer felt really James Bondy to me. It felt like kind of over the top. I'm like, what? But he definitely like believed what he was saying. That there was no reason for him to exaggerate, because I was just his classmate, and we talked about a bunch of little everyday stuff. He never was trying to show off ever. It was the opposite. I was trying to pry stuff out of him. So I want you guys to realize that he was just a very like to a point, almost kind of to himself a little bit. And it was always a smooth conversation, but it was definitely me asking him. He never like volunteered stuff, and it did feel like all of it was a little weighing on him. It makes sense. And of course, the big thing when I asked him, did they do it? And when he said they were, just cold killers, I'm like, well, how do you know? How do you know they did it? And he's like, Andrew, like Eric was my close friend. He's the younger brother. And, I can't remember how long, but he's like, a couple days after the murders, Eric just opened up and spilled the beans and told me everything. He took me through the entire setup of like how they, walked into the house and how they murdered their parents and what it was like and how he felt, like the whole thing. He's like, Andrew, he told me the whole thing. And then I was like, what'd you do? He's like, well, I sat with that information for a while, and I can't remember how long it was. If it was like 48 hours or a couple weeks or something. But he's like, I sat with that info. I wasn't really quite sure what to do. I was really scared. But ultimately, I went to the police and I told them what was up. And so, yeah, he gave the police this major information. Now, there were other entities giving the police information too. It wasn't just this person. And I should give you the name of this person. This person's name is Craig Signorelli. If you ever watch any sort of Menendez documentary or the Netflix show on the Menendez murders called Monsters, I think, that just came out, he'll have a smaller part. He's the friend, and he often shows them playing tennis. I think Craig was really, really good at tennis from what I remember. That may be how they originally met. I can't remember, but if you get into the Menendez story, their tennis is a big deal throughout. And Craig was, I believe these days, that's he's still involved in the tennis world. But that was his story, and I found it obviously utterly fascinating. And I really had a lot of empathy for him when we return. My final thoughts on the Menendez murders. Hello, and welcome back to the Pseudoarchaeology Podcast, episode 152. I'm your host, Dr. Andrew Kikella, and we are wrapping up the Menendez murders and my little relationship to one of the witnesses. Now, in the intervening years, and what's funny is I haven't thought of this a lot, obviously I do have other things in my life than the Menendez murders. I know, not much, but there's one or two things. I looked up Craig, and Signorelli, and just to see what the media world kind of says about him. And you know what? They're kind of cruel. That was one of the reasons I kind of wanted to do this too, because if you look up Craig Signorelli, a bunch of people complain about him. They're like, he was a crappy witness. He was not believable. And I'm like, what? I found Craig to be smart, thoughtful, kind of demurring in a positive sense. You know what I mean? Like just a good conversationalist, reflexive, all that kind of good stuff. Like just a cool person who you'd want to be friends with. He was not like a braggart, over the top, showy, none of that stuff. When you go online, they say stuff about him like, oh, just so preppy. And it's like, he's in court. He has to dress up. How else is he supposed to look? It's like the early 1990s. What's he going to do? Any male dressing up would look preppy in 1993. So it's true. Yes, he came from, I believe, a wealthy-ish family in Calabasas. That's how he knew him. He grew up in Calabasas with the Menendez brothers. But I want to kind of give him a little defense and be like, you obviously don't know him. It's one of those moments just where the internet and Twitter and all that stuff, it's just so poisonous and gross. It's like, sure, you can talk constructively about what would have been better or worse for him as a witness on the stand. How should he have said things? You could say that. That's fine. And I guess a lot of the jurors basically, didn't find his testimony that moving or something, which is, so what? You see weird stuff online too, where they're like, I can't believe he betrayed Eric. Yeah, what's he supposed to do? Keep a double murder to himself? Like that's idiotic, right? Yes, he needs to tell the cops. What, should he be complicit in the murder? He should keep it to himself. It's just idiotic stuff, right? And all these fools online, it's like, yeah, if you were in his shoes, yeah, you'd keep it to yourself because you're hardcore. It really drove me nuts, you guys. I felt that it was completely just unfair, to Craig. And what else is he supposed to do? Put yourself in his shoes. What would you do? People complaining that how you dressed in court, you were too clean shaven. Should he have come in some sweats and a t-shirt? Like, oh God, can't you hear it in my voice? Listeners, I've gotten riled up. I have to control myself. So, I would also say, in terms of his demeanor on the whole case thing, he did not brag about it again at all. I was the one pushing him. I mean, I'm sitting there in film studies class going, hey, Craig, come on, you got to tell me, like, oh, so they did it? Oh, like, it's my fault. It's my fault. It's not his fault. And they batter Craig on how good of a friend he was with Eric too. It's like, have none of you gone to high school? They talk about, oh, well, Craig wasn't really his friend anymore. It's like, yeah, well, I had a super close friend in high school and we grew apart after we graduated from high school, like 92% of friendships, but we were still close. Like if you think back to high school friendships, those people who maybe you haven't spoken to in years or decades, they still know a lot about you. Like I would say that my old high school friends know me, and they would be very good people to interview if you were doing the Andrew Kinkella unauthorized biography. Like they would have a lot to say. So you can't throw Craig under the bus by oddly saying that he didn't defend his friend and he wasn't really his friend anyway. Like, what? This is stupid. It's one of those things I just don't get. I don't get the Craig Signorelli hate. I don't get it. He's a nice guy, you guys. And at the same time, I'm not here to say that I was Craig's close personal friend. I was not. We were merely classmates in class, and he was somebody I enjoyed. Like if I walked into class late and he was sitting there, I'd be like, "Oh, cool! I can sit next to Craig. This is cool." And that's it. Today, I don't think he would remember me. I definitely know he wouldn't remember my name. I couldn't remember his, at first, but he would probably remember something like, oh, yeah, that dude who I sat next to in film class or whatever, that kind of thing, kind of remember my look or something like that. That's very fair. So why am I talking about all this in the first place? Well, it wraps back to the beginning, so that the Menendez case is now back in the public eye. And it's because they want to reopen it. And there's this push to get them off. And the reasoning being that their dad was a pretty horrible person, right? That comes out, and may have abused the boys, right? This kind of thing. This comes out. But I will tell you this. I do know at the time, Craig was not into that. He was like, dude, I don't believe any of that, right? He felt that it was totally trumped up by them in an attempt, of course, to get off or to lessen their sentence. I have no idea what Craig would say today. Again, he's operating in 1993-94. Other information does come to light, but then you have to ask yourself hard questions like, even if the boys were molested somehow, does that still okay buying shotguns, premeditated, going into your house and blowing away your parents? See, that's tough. You have to think of the whole case in a cold, adult, thoughtful manner, which of course I'm known for, cold, thoughtful, adult manner. That's who's the first person you think of when you go cold, thoughtful, adult? You're like, Andrew Kinkella. That's who's coming to dinner. So who knows where this is going to go? At this point, the brothers have served, 30 years plus, 35 years. And I don't really have a feeling or take on, should they be set free or not? Are they bad people no matter what? Yes. Would you do that? And don't give me the internet answer. Oh, yeah, I would. Yeah, I'd blow my parents away. Like, come on. There's a little gray area in some of this, but anyway, that was my shoulder rub with fame. It was interesting. It was interesting to have my secret little in on the facts of the case, eyewitness account, as it's on television. And in a funny way, I'm not from Southern California, right? But I moved here to go to school at Santa Barbara, and I never left. It also just kind of introed me to the whole Southern California thing in a way too. It was another of 1,000 experiences where I was like, good God, Southern California really is like that. And with that, I'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the Pseudoarchaeology podcast. Please like and subscribe wherever you like and subscribe. And if you have questions for me, Dr. Andrew Kinkella, feel free to reach out using the links below or go to my YouTube channel, Kinkella Teaches Archaeology. See you guys next time.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Culturo Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network. And was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.